All right. So this was kind of a last minute topic choice. I expected to have a different topic, which didn't work out. So I had to quickly scramble, and this is actually something I presented at the Zappaletto conference in Zanzibar in February. So I thought I would share it here. So we're going to be looking at graph literacy, which is graphs, and why it's important, and some activities involved in it. And a reminder that we are recording. So in today's session, we'll be talking a bit about what graph literacy is. It's actually, I know what graphs are, but I didn't ever think of the ability to read graphs as graph or graphic literacy until I started doing a little bit of research. So if the term graph literacy isn't familiar to you, you are not alone. So we'll have a bit of an overview, looking at why this is even a topic today. And then basically the session will be presenting a lesson plan or a lesson that I did. So we'll be doing some of the steps for that. We'll also analyze it, and then we'll look at other ways that we could adapt it for specific contexts. So I am curious to start us off. Khadija, I know that you are an English teacher, but also currently a student, and our other participants, I have to say, I don't know. I can't quite remember. I'm guessing you're English teachers as well. But I'm curious to know, in school, when you're teaching English, do you use graphs? Sometimes we find graphs in the readings we do or in other places. Do you explicitly teach graph reading to students? Is it something that doesn't come up? Is it something you try to ignore or avoid? Just generally, what is your experience teaching students to read and describe graphs? And if you don't have personal experience, you can also talk about your own experience with reading graphs. Khadija, go ahead.
Thank you, Mina. For me, when I see graphs, I normally skip. I try to brush through, or I skip it.
Why?
Initially, I never used to see any relationship, but after attending some sessions, I came to realize we can still have mathematics in English. So hopefully when I go back to class now after the study leave, I will start teaching them how to interpret graphs, because I realized most students fail mathematics just because they don't know how to analyze. But if we help them learn how to analyze through English language learning, maybe it will help them even perform better in mathematics and other subjects. So I have learned my lesson the hard way. I will never skip graphs again.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, what you said, I think highlights some of the things we're going to talk about, that we find that students often are uncomfortable with graphs, and we often find that their teachers are also uncomfortable with them. I've worked with a number of teachers who said, oh no, when I see a graph, we skip it and go to the next thing because they lack confidence with it. And I think you have a great point, especially in our Kenyan context, and I think other contexts as well. We know that we might think, English and math are separate, but classes are usually taught in English, exams happen in English. And so if our students don't have the language to talk about graphs in English, then they will struggle. And I think we'll also see that math is not the only place that we see graphs, although it's the kind of place we associate with graphs. So thank you, Khadija. I think that brought up a lot of good and important points that go with this. All right. And I see Jeffrey is joining us. Hi, Jeffrey. Glad you could be with us. All right. So graphs and charts. And for the rest of this session, I'll just be referring to them with graphs, but I mean any kind of diagram like a pie chart or bar chart, all of those, I'm just going to be calling graphs for the purposes of this presentation. So they are very important. So a graph is a visual representation of a lot of information. I can collect tons and tons of data. I can do interviews or experiments or surveys, and I can have lots and lots of data that would be difficult to look at in text form, but I can show it in a concise way as a visual representation through a graph or a chart. So it takes a large amount of information and consolidates it into something that's easier to look at and easier to identify trends with. And so while we might think of graphs definitely with math because it's showing the amount of something, the rate of something, something like that, we do see graphs in a lot of other areas as well. Often, if we're looking at some sort of, often with it like a science-based reading text, we might find that there are graphs also with the text. So imagine you're reading an article or even something in a textbook that maybe it's talking about climate change or something like that. And so you may find a box to the side that has a graph or a chart. And the graph or the chart is actually there to support comprehension. So that if someone has a high level of graphic literacy, that they can actually look at the graph first, and that will support their reading skills. Unfortunately, we find that often students' graphic literacy is low, and so this visual aid there that's supposed to support them actually frightens them, scares them, and does not support them because they don't have the skills to properly read them. So something that students are really missing out if they're not able to access that support. It's actually there to help them. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, that graphs and charts are not contained to just math and science fields. We see them in a lot of different fields. In fact, for my thesis that I wrote for grad school to get my master's in TESOL, I did a study that included graphs and charts because I was collecting data and I wanted to show it in a way that was easy to see. We see them in other STEM fields. So if your students are doing different sorts of science like biology, chemistry, we find them often in those. If we're talking about things like ecology and climate change, very common. Any kind of technology, math, of course, all of those STEM areas. Also, we find them if we're reading maybe an article about health, something like that. We find that the charts and graphs are very common. And then if you or your learners decide that they want to do something maybe abroad, they might decide they want to take something like the IELTS. And in task 1 of the writing of the IELTS, there is always some sort of graph or chart that has to be described. So we find that this is something that's hard to avoid in life. And that is something to note. Actually, as I was doing research for this topic, I was reading an article. It was only loosely related, and I was going to skip it, but I kept going a little bit, and it was interesting because it was an article put together by somebody in the US, some sort of health organization, and they were suggesting that that doctors and other healthcare providers stop using charts and graphs because the information in them wasn't being comprehended or accessed by the general public. And so we see that this weakness in terms of graph literacy is unfortunately becoming quite common. And it is unfortunate. Oh, checking in, I see we have some more people joining us. Oh, Ruki is here, excellent. Lorian is here. Jamal is here as well. Faith has joined us, welcome all. Okay, so hopefully I have convinced you that graph literacy is important. And why are we talking about it in this session, which is usually more English related? because graph reading is literacy. Literacy is reading, and reading usually comes under the English teacher. Yeah, Lorian, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Hi.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for this nice presentation. I think I can describe myself as not really good in math, but also mathematics is a very interesting language if you understand, especially when it comes to using a mathematical visual representation like graphs to describe things, information, and this is really what we want. And I'm really interested in this because also I'm the fan of literacy. That literacy takes almost all areas of life. So understanding how we use graphs to explain information, it's really important for our students. And I came into this when you've been talking about the importance of graphs and charts. My question is maybe I'll take a little bit back. When we talk about graphs and charts, I've been really thinking we've been using charts also for classroom, to use charts to help the students to use them to express themselves, especially in the writing where I work more with my students. Then when we talk about graphs, especially, what is really the origin of graphs? So what is the intention of graphs? Someone who created the graph, what was the intention of graphs to the public, or graphs to the students, or whoever in the community? And maybe this can help me understand the real literacy of graphs and charts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for making some good points. I don't consider myself strong in math. And so I understand your viewpoint that if we think about graphs as a math teacher's kind of realm, then yeah, it definitely does seem less appealing, which is why I'm trying to advocate for more of a literacy aspect. When we look at a graph, we are reading the graph. And so although it may have numbers on it, we still are analyzing it the way that we analyze words. And then we also find often that being able to describe what we see in the graph through text, that kind of back and forth, is part of, I think, the language teacher, the English teacher's realm as well. As far as the second half of your question about the orientation, I have no idea. I know that graphs and charts have been around for a long time. I'm not sure where they originated or anything like that. I just know that they often appear in all different fields, not just the STEM fields. And that if we can't access them and we can't access the information that's in them, we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to our students, that they're actually supposed to make life easier for us rather than harder. And so we want to be able to see how that we can kind of decipher what's in there, and even better, if we need to make our own, which I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So I've been talking about the importance of graphs and charts. There's a big but here. So today's presentation stems from my own struggles and my own challenges. But not just mine. Again, I did some research ahead of time to see if I was the only one having this problem. I mentioned the article I read previously, but other research I did shows that a lot of students can understand the specific information. So if you have a chart that shows like time and temperature, and you ask them, for example, what temperature was the temperature at noon, that they can identify that specific information. But in terms of identifying trends, which is kind of the next step and a more important step, they really struggled to identify the trends. And really, that's what a graph is there for. I mean, we could look in a text that has all of this information, find out these specifics, but a graph or a chart really shows the general kind of trend. If things are increasing, decreasing, if they're constantly fluctuating, if they've leveled off, things like that. The other issue, or one of the other issues, is that it seems from many studies that students' graph literacy is often related to their other background. So especially if we're looking at university students, they found that those in the STEM fields found graphs and charts very easy because they were in STEM fields where graphs and charts were constantly being dealt with and explicitly dealt with. However, in fields that were non-STEM, students lacked confidence and a very high degree of literacy. And this article also talked about how their teachers felt the same. And this was my experience as well. So, as I mentioned, this whole topic stemmed from my own experience. I was working in Uzbekistan in university. I was teaching first, second, and third year pre-service teachers. So they were all in the English department, and they were all going to be future teachers. And so being able to read graphs is important generally, but the other issue there was that one of the ways that teachers can earn a higher salary is to take the IELTS and to get, I think they have to get a 6.5. And if they get this score on the IELTS, they can get a higher salary and they become eligible for other sorts of things. And they were all really struggling with the graph part of the IELTS. Yeah, very good, Khadija. I think we talk about how climate change is an emerging topic in our classrooms, and that graphs and charts we often see in those kinds of texts, in those kinds of studies, those kinds of discussions, that graphs and charts are very important, right? Yeah, they show the adverse effects of climate change. Excellent. Oh, and on education. Yes, right. That this is that someone might say, oh, I'm not in math and I'm not in science, so I really don't need this. But that's not true at all. As mentioned, for my thesis, I had to have graphs and charts. And even if you do a thesis that isn't that kind of study, you would need to read the literature that goes with it. And I would say in like linguistics and those sorts of articles, I would say at least 60% of them include some sort of graphs or charts, because a study involves collecting data, and then data is often represented in this way. So whether we like it or not, it's something we had to deal with. So I was trying to work with my students to improve their skills in this area because they were mostly motivated by the IELTS. But I also was motivated because I thought it was an important skill. So we did all kinds of things. There's this great website that the BBC puts out. It has videos about graphs and charts. It has all different kinds of practice. And so we were doing that stuff all the time. But they didn't seem to be improving. They still felt very uncomfortable. They still seemed to lack confidence. And so I just really was wondering, what could I do? So all my efforts to explain and teach were not working. So I decided that I needed to approach this differently. So I decided to turn it around upside down. Instead of having students look at graphs and interpret them and explain them, I decided that they should create their own graphs, and that maybe by seeing how a graph is put together, then maybe that would help them to have more confidence and become better at reading graphs. So I decided to use a task-based approach, and I put together a lesson plan that I wanted to be student-centered. I wanted it to have collaboration, and I found it to be pretty successful. So before we go any further, I mentioned that it was task supported. So what is a task? We've talked about tasks previously in some of our sessions, but it has been a while. So a task is an activity. Loosely, we can call it an activity, but it's a little more specific. It has to have some connection to the real world. So for example, you could say a gap fill with grammar, verb tenses, or something like that is a task. But how is it connected to the real world? It's not really. So this is going to have some connection to the real world. It will require authentic communication. So students are communicating, not just practicing a certain focus, but they're going to have to ask and answer questions and do something with that information. The focus is on meaning rather than form. So we're not really talking about grammar at all. Hopefully they're using good grammar, but that's not the focus here. And then in the end, one of the most important aspects of a task is at the end you have a clearly defined product. So for example, a role play would be a product, something that we can see, or a poster would be a product. And you'll see here we have a graph that is our final product. Okay, so these are the parts of the lesson. There's different ways to organize lessons, but this is how I did it. I started out with a warm-up that I combined with instruction. I'll show you how that works. And then we move on to the actual task itself. I'm sorry. After that, we go on to the pre-task, which helps prepare the learners for the task. Then we do the actual task, and then you'll see we have some post-task activities as well. Okay. Sorry, this PowerPoint has a lot of extra animations on it. All right, so whoops, this is the warm-up and instruction. I'll explain it first, and then we're going to sort of do it. So the warm-up and the instruction, I kind of combined and layered. So I asked the class several warm-up questions, kind of survey-style questions. And after each question, we kind of analyzed the question, what kind of answers the question produced, and then kind of looked at how we could kind of organize that information as well. And using those questions and the information led me to talk about different types of graphs and some of the features of graphs. Not a deep explanation, but you will see. All right, so in the classroom, I did this as a 4 corners activity. So I asked the students, who are your siblings? If you have sisters and brothers, you'll get in one corner. If you have just sisters, you'll get in one corner, just brothers, or just an only child. So this is a survey style question, but it also is kind of fun because it's 4 corners. Students get to get up and move. And then once they get into their corners, they take a minute to share with their group about their answers. So we know we are not in a physical space. We are online. Nevertheless, I think I can propose this survey question to you. So I have a poll up on the screen. If you'll take a moment to tell me, who are your siblings? And you can click on your answers and let us know. We'll see this group, how you compare to other groups in terms of your siblings. Oh, I see a lot of people have both sisters and brothers. So far, 100% of people have both sisters and brothers. Okay, we've got one person with only a brother or brothers. Oh, wow. So far, I have no one with only sisters or a sister and no only children. I'll give about 20 more seconds for this. It looks like about half of you have answered the poll. if you haven't answered the poll, I encourage you to, because actually your answer to this question will determine the next thing we do. So if you don't answer the poll, you'll struggle to do the next task we have. Think of about 5 more seconds. I also realize there might be a delay on your internet. This is very interesting. If we were doing this in a physical space, I would have 2 empty corners. I would have one person all alone in one corner, and I would have 6 people in the corner of sisters and brothers. Interesting. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And actually, based on this, I'm not going to do the next part. So what I could do with this next is put you into breakout rooms, just like if you were in the corners of the room. But since we have one person who would be all alone, 6 people in one room, and then 4 of you didn't answer, I think we don't need to do that. I think you get the gist of this. Okay. So this is one example of a survey style question. We see that there are 4 possibilities for answers. And if I were doing this in the classroom, as I mentioned, I would do this as kind of a physical thing. I could also have students raise their hand. If you have just a sister or sisters, raise your hand. Just a brother or brothers, raise your hand. We could do it that way. But I think it's a little more fun to do it this way. So let's imagine that we had a little bit more of a variety of answers. And so using the answers, I could create a chart. And here I have a pie chart. We know a pie chart looks like a piece of pie. And we see that most people have brothers and sisters. And so I think also this, this chart kind of helps us to see why graphs are a nice visual depiction. Even if you don't know, you don't need to know the exact numbers. Just by looking at this, you see, oh, blue is sisters and brothers. Wow, most people have sisters and brothers. And so that's kind of the dominating trend here. And then we see that this is the smallest piece of pie. And then we have these other pieces of pie. And so that's one example, a pie chart. And the pie chart is effective. We only have 4 colors. It's easy to differentiate them, easy to differentiate the categories. With a pie chart, we usually have a key. The key tells us which each color is, or we might see the different slices are labeled as well sometimes. And then another way we could represent the same information is through a bar chart. A bar chart has bars. Imagine each one is like a chocolate bar. And so this is another way that we can represent the same information. And just like in the other chart, automatically we can see, oh, this one is higher than the rest of them. So it really sticks out. And we see in the bar chart, we have the actual numbers here. Actually, 2 other features I want to point out here is that this is labeled here and this is labeled down here. And that there's a title. And I want to point out that this also has a title here. So some of the other aspects. Right. So this is something I would have done while I was after that first warm-up question, talking a little bit about it. So now I have my second question. My survey question is, what is your name? And I think automatically we see a problem. We cannot have this question the same way we did the others, because everybody's name is a little bit different. So it would be really hard. We couldn't do 4 corners with this. If I said, okay, everyone whose name is Rukia, raise your hand, maybe 1 or 2 people would raise their hand. In our group, I think just 1. So we see we have an issue here. Well, how can we do something like this? All right, we're going to try something else. I'm going to take you to another website. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing here. And we're going to go to Mentimeter. And you'll see that I have a poll on Mentimeter. Okay. So if you go to menti.com, you should see the website up at the top. It says menti.com, and you'll see the code that is there as well, 79695766. You will be able to fill out my survey, and I will be able to collect your results. I'll put the website in the chat as well. So that's the website, menti.com. And then the code I'll put here too, so that you can just copy paste it. Once you get to the website and you put in the code, you should be able to let us know what letter your first name starts with. And you'll notice that I've taken this question that has almost an unlimited number of answers, and I put it into categories. Otherwise, it would be really almost impossible to analyze the data because we would have too many answers. So here I have it broken up just a little bit. Oh, I see we have one responder so far, 2 responders. So as you're filling it and getting online into the, oh, interesting. So this is an example of using technology to collect information. So depending on your classroom, this might be a fun way to collect data that your students like. But if you are not able to use technology, of course, we could do this in a physical classroom in other ways, right? We could, knowing our students, we could make the groups on the board. We could do it like we did the first one with the 4 corners. Instead of having 4 corners, we have different parts of the room. Everybody whose name starts with A through D, come stand here. E through H, come stand here. So there are different ways that we could do it in the classroom as well. But since we're on a virtual platform here, I thought it might be fun to do it in a virtual way. I have 6 responders so far. Interesting. We see that A through D and I through L are the most common so far. And I'm trying to think about who's here, where their names go in here. Unfortunately, I can't respond. I would put mine, I would put mine here. We can also see the exact percentages as well. So we saw in the bar graph, usually we have numbers up here on the side, but on this, they have the numbers displayed. So this would be one way to do it. All right, I'm going to give about 10 more seconds if anyone else wants to log in their answer. It looks like about 6 people have logged in so far. And just so you know, we are going to come back to this website at the very end. So if you didn't get a chance to log in, we will come back to it. If you are logged in, we will come back to it. Okay, let's see. I'm going to take a screenshot of this just so we can keep it. Okay. So we saw another way to collect the data that we're looking for using Mentimeter, but that, of course, we could just do this in our classroom with a regular pen and paper or chalk and a chalkboard, something like that. And so those are two kinds of questions that I use to warm the class up and also to highlight the difference. If we're going to ask a survey question, and you'll see we're going to be using surveys for this, we have to make sure that we're not answering a yes/no question. So if I just said for my survey, do you like ugali? Yes or no, we would see that that also doesn't yield very interesting results with just yes or no. We saw that the first question about siblings had 4 categories. And so that was a nice survey question. It had a manageable number of categories. What is your name is not a manageable number, but we managed to make it manageable by creating categories. Oh, most definitely, Khadija. It's actually much easier than you would think. I saw someone use it and then I said, oh, I want to use it. And I got on there and at first I said, oh, I don't know what to do. But after pushing a couple buttons, it was fine. All right, so using those different kinds of questions just to highlight for students what types of questions we have and then how they can be represented. In this lesson, we're only going to be focusing on pie charts and bar charts. The first time I did this lesson, I had students trying to create line graphs and they were raising their hand, teacher, help. And I said, what's wrong? They said, it doesn't work because a line graph shows a change over time. And those aren't the kinds of questions we're dealing with today. If your students can master pie charts and bar charts, then they can move on to line graphs. All right, so I've warmed up the students. I've given them some instruction on types of graphs. If this were real class, they would have a little bit more. So now we're going to have the pre-task. The pre-task is before the actual task, so I'm going to set the students up for it. So what they're going to do is they're going to work in groups to create a suitable survey question, and then they are going to conduct the survey. So those are the 2 parts of the pre-task. So a little bit of rationale here. Why surveys? That might seem like a totally different topic. Well, a survey or a questionnaire is one way that we collect data. We get information. And it's also a great tool in an English language classroom because it fosters communication and it motivates authentic communication. Students are asking a question and they have to listen to the answer because they need to record the data. Then they have this data which they will analyze and report. And so we see that students are moving up the stages of Bloom's taxonomy, using their critical thinking skills, using problem-solving skills. We have interaction, communication, collaboration, and we have an authentic task. Surveys are something that are used in real life. And so there are many advantages of using a survey in the classroom. Surveys also can sound technical or scientific, but they don't need to be, right? My question, who are your siblings, is a pretty easy question that even a beginner level class could do. Okay, so this is the procedure where they're going to create the surveys and conduct the surveys. And so that is what we are going to do now. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and in the breakout room, you are going to create just one survey style question. In your real class, you could have them do several, but for this, we're just going to choose one. So I suggest you choose a topic that interests all of you. It can be anything. It can be favorite foods, music, where you live, anything you like. But I want you to also think about the design of your question. If it's an open question, such as what is your name, are you going to have different categories? Or are you going to have multiple choice so that when you ask the question that you can manage the data? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, as I mentioned. And we're not going to be there for very long because the only thing you have to do is create a survey style question. So I have rooms of about 3 to 4. I will be out here in case you fall out or need help. All right. I think everyone has returned. Hopefully you came up with a question. If you did not, speak up now if you don't have a survey question. Just one is enough. Also, please remember what your room is now, because you are going to come back to this room after. I did take a screenshot, so if you do forget, don't worry, I'll be able to put you back after. But you're going to change rooms because the next step is to conduct your survey. So you don't want to conduct your survey with the same people. For one thing, you would have a limited amount of information. So you're going to be going to a new room, and I'll give you instructions on that in just a moment. In your new room, you are going to take turns conducting your survey. So for example, Anne is going to be in a new room, and in this room, maybe she'll see Christine and Caroline. And so Anne will ask Christine and Caroline her survey question. She'll make a note of the answer. Christine will ask her survey question, and then Caroline will ask her survey question. Any questions so far? Okay. Give me a moment. I'm going to, oh, go ahead.
Can I quick this question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Simple questions like what should we most of the time we conduct this question. Any other limitation when you go for that?
Say that
Like
again?
you restriction should any
No.
limitation, restriction you put yourself
At this point,
when doing
no.
that? Okay.
At this point, there's no restrictions. You might find that maybe after you'll find that you should have put some restrictions, but at this point, no. I would say there's no restrictions at this point. Good question.
Thank you.
All right. Now in the chat, I'm gonna put I'm gonna put the rooms. Okay, so in room, I'm going to open the rooms and you're going to put yourselves into the new rooms. So room 1 is going to have Khadija, Christine, Caroline, Carol, and Tina. Okay. In room 2, we have Nancy. Hi, Nancy. I don't think I said hi to you earlier. Nancy. I don't know this person. Hatun Jimana. Lorian, I'm going to put you in there as well. And Felix. Okay, and then the final room will be room 3. And in this room, we will have Rukia, Jane, and Jeffrey. And then Tiberius and Sylvia didn't enter a room before, which is, I'm not calling you out. If you decide you want to enter a room for this, you may. I'll let you choose your own rooms. So you can see in the chat what room you should be entering. I'm going to create new rooms that you will choose yourself. Give me one moment. Okay, so they say room 1, room 2, room 3. I'm going to open the rooms. This time you'll have 5 minutes to conduct your surveys in the room. Make sure you keep your information. So going to the rooms and conducting your surveys. All right, I think we have everyone back. So hopefully you had a chance, everyone in the room had a chance to ask your survey question and get the answers. And so the next step, okay. The next step is you're going to go back to your first room so that you can share the data, which actually brings us to the task. Before we do that, just to kind of bring this back into the physical classroom. So the reason that I broke you guys all up is if you have the groups make their survey questions and then you have the whole class mix and ask the survey, then you're not going to have accurate results because maybe, for example, maybe Lorian and Jane were in the same group together and they both asked the same person. Well, then it looks like 2 people answered with that answer when in fact it was 1 person who had the same answer. So by breaking the students into new groups, you ensure that they have a limited number of people to talk to, that they're not asking the same people the same question. So that's the reason for going into those other groups. Other ways you could do this is you could have students take their survey questions home and ask their neighbors, something like that, to ensure that they're conducting the survey with different people rather than overlapping. Okay, so those were the pre-tasks. And now it is time for the task. So the procedure for the students is they would get back into their first group and they would compile and analyze the data, which sounds very technical, but basically it means that they share their answers and they figure out, okay, 2 people said they like blue, 3 people said they like red, or whatever the question was. So here they're putting together, sharing their answers, and figuring out who answered, how many people gave each answer. Then they're going to decide which type of graph to use. Should they use a pie chart or should they use a bar graph? Sometimes both are fine, and sometimes one is better than the other depending on the results. For example, if you had 1 person say they like yellow, and 1 person said they like green, and 1 person said they like orange, it's not going to look very good on a pie graph because they're going to just be little tiny slices. So in that case, maybe a bar graph would be better. Students would then create their graph. And finally, they would title it and make sure that the relevant data is labeled. If it's a pie graph, they'll have a key. If they have a bar chart, then the axis, the vertical line and the horizontal line would be labeled. So don't worry, teachers, I'm not going to make you make graphs, but you are going to get back with your original group. So I'm going to open the breakout room one more time so that you can go back with your original group. If you can't remember who it is, don't worry, I will remind you. And in your group, you're going to just kind of share your answers and look at the data. You're going to think about which type of graph is best. You don't have to create a graph. This is all you have to do. Also, you might mention, was there anything interesting about your results? So I'll put this slide up in just a second, but first, I can't remember who was in the original rooms, but luckily I took a screenshot.
We still remember the numbers.
You do? You remember your first room? Okay, well,
yeah.
Good job. Excellent. All right, then I'm going to open up the rooms again, the 4 rooms, and then I'll put the original slide back on as well. Good job following directions. All right, so I'm going to recreate these rooms. And you'll be able to, sorry, hang on. You'll be able to select the room yourself so that you can make sure you go back with your original group. Okay. It is open and I will put up the slides so that you remember what to do. You're just sharing your data, noticing if there's anything interesting about it. All right. So remember, you do not have to make graphs. If you were students, this is when you would make graphs. But I'm not going to make you make graphs. I am interested in what you all chose as survey topics and if there was anything interesting about the results. I know that not everybody rejoined their rooms, but it looked like there were at least 2 people in every room, enough to discuss. Does anyone care to share their survey question and any interesting results they came across? You can put your answer in the chat, or of course you can raise your hand and speak as well. I do wonder what your survey questions were. If they were teacher questions, general questions, and if you got even results, strange results. Hopefully you had enough time to process everything. I also see that my title to my slide changed itself to Spanish. Oh, we're all shy. No one wants to share their survey topics. Oh, someone does.
I think that
Go ahead. Gloria?
sorry, I mean, I was like, we would be probably having another 1 minute to share. We'll caught up with time.
Okay.
Okay.
No
But it's
worries.
okay.
What was the question? No?
Okay, Mina, for group 3,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
we had a general question like, I enjoyed the lesson. I enjoyed the lesson.
And how are the results?
So we had a scale: strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree, not sure, and disagree. So our result was 5 out of 6 strongly agreed, and then 1 out of 6 agreed. So the percentages were at 83% strongly agree and 17% agree.
Wow,
The
you
rest
even
were-
did the percentages.
Yes.
Oh, very nice. Oh, so not a range of answers though. The answers were kind of concentrated in one area. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing, Christine. I see that group 2, in which we had Khadijah, Nancy, and Rukia, are you familiar with any drug abuse prevention programs or initiatives targeted towards teens in your community? So very targeted question. I wonder what the answers were. I wonder if people were generally familiar or not familiar. Where I currently am, I am not. So if you're still collecting data, in the US I am, but here I am not. Okay, so obviously you all, as teachers, don't necessarily need to be creating data or creating graphs, but I wanted to give you a feel of what the students would be doing in this task. So this is what I had my students do. So instead of having them read graphs and answer questions, what percent did this, as the general trend increasing or decreasing, instead I had them do surveys and based on their own surveys, create graphs. Oh, good. I'm glad to see that most were familiar. That is positive news. And the result, when I did this with 3 different, well, I did this with 6 different classes, first, second, and third years, because they were all struggling. And it went over, I thought, pretty well. They expressed a lot more comfort, a lot more confidence. And when it was time for the post-task activity, they did a much better job than they'd been doing earlier. So for post-task activity, I want the students to now communicate verbally what is in their graphs. So we could have them doing group or individual presentations where they share their information with the class. We could do it as an IELTS style write-up. Or if we're really focused on graph comprehension, we could also have students create their own quizzes about their own graphs that they distribute to their classmates to see if the students understood each other's graphs. So these are just 3 ideas of some post-task activities where they're extending their learning and showing that now they can communicate what is in the graph. What I did with my group is actually they did individual presentations where they took turns walking around the room and looking at each other's graphs. And then we did IELTS style write-ups after, because that was what they really wanted to focus on, was their IELTS related skills. So some of the reasons why I think this worked. One is very student-centered. The students created their own questions. They conducted their own their surveys. They decided for themselves how to represent the information. It was task supported. So instead of being just a worksheet or an exercise, it had steps that resulted in a product. They were very pleased with the product. I could have had them do individual surveys and individual charts, but because they were struggling so much, I had them do it collaboratively. That way there's more support, more communication. It is a 4 skills lesson. It is using speaking and listening, reading and writing. 21st century skills are a part of this in terms of communication and collaboration, but also if we think about graph literacy, and we could probably if we look deeper, find that there's more connections to 21st century skills. And finally, this is an adaptable approach as well. There's some different things we can do with this. But of course, nothing is perfect. I'm curious what challenges you anticipate. So if you go back to menti.com, it should be the same code. There's actually a second question, and I'm going to exit out of here so I can set up that question. But the question is, what challenges do you anticipate? Perhaps you have challenges opening and closing the many windows. Okay, so you should be able now to answer this question. What challenges do you anticipate with this approach? If you were to do something like this in your own classroom, we know that nothing is perfect and that we should expect some challenges. So if you were to do this, what challenges might you expect in your classroom? By anticipating challenges, this is the first step to solving the challenges. And in case you've lost the website, it is menti.com. And the code is still the same code. If you had it open earlier, you should be able to just go back onto the site and see that there's a second question being displayed. And I'll know when you answer because the answers will appear on the screen. And it's also another example of how we can collect data, but you'll see that this is a very open question and probably would not be suitable for a graph or chart because I would expect a diversity of answers. Yes, right. You might have students just walking around, but they're not actually doing their survey. They're not actually answering the questions, right? So when they return to their group and you say, okay, share your answers, I don't have any answers. Right, so you want to make sure, yes, students are actually doing the work. Yes, that's definitely one possible challenge. Good, what else? Time limitation, yes. Especially if students have never done anything like this. right? This would be hard to do in a 40-minute class. You might want to break it up into pieces, right? You might have them create their survey question on the first day, and maybe it's the second day that they conduct the survey. But that also means there are other things you're not doing. You might have them brainstorm their questions at home and come in with them. That way it cuts down a little bit on that. Ooh, I see a lot of, poor data interpretation. That is very possible, right? We definitely want to keep an eye on what they're doing. It might turn out that they've made what looks like a beautiful graph, but doesn't actually match the data. Language proficiency, yes, right? This is always an issue in our classes, which I think is one of the reasons to let them choose their topic, right? Hopefully they'll choose a topic that they have the language for. I see a theme here: time limitation, and managing time, right? Something teachers are always concerned about. The lack of devices. So they don't need devices for this. Keep in mind that we can do all of this with pen and paper. We're just kind of doing a more technological version because we are on Zoom. But it would be fun with devices, but you don't need devices to do it. Unrealistic data. Yes, I think this goes with the poor data interpretation, right? They might make up their own answers instead of asking. They might fib about their answers, something like that. So we might find some very interesting results. Excellent. Good. All right, I'm going to give about a few more seconds if anybody else wants to answer here, and then I'm going to close this and we will finish up. Yeah, definitely. If I broke this into categories, time would want to be one of these categories, right? Because we see there's definitely a time-related theme here. That's true. Khadijah, I'm glad you said that. Students who hate mathematics might withdraw from doing the activity. So we don't want to focus on the math aspect here, right? In fact, except for counting the answers, we can do this without any other math, right? So we want to present this more as a reading skill, as a communicative skill, something like that, right? That, yeah, if we focus on the math and making them compute the percentages, then that will turn off a lot of students. So personally, I would de-emphasize the math aspect of this. Okay. Excellent. All right, I'm going to close out of here. Very interesting answers. All right, we're going to wrap up this session. So this is, I think, a very adaptable approach. It's something that can be done with beginner and low-level students. You would do it as a whole class exercise. Maybe the teacher would come in with a question already, maybe, what's your favorite color or something like that, and the students answer as a group. And so the teacher walks them through collecting the data, putting the data up on the board, and how to create a graph from there. We could also tailor this to different types of content, right? If we're doing climate change, we could have a survey about what students do or how concerned they are about climate change. If it's about history, we could have a history question. We could tailor the survey topic to whatever type of class it is. If we're working with advanced learners, we can certainly make this more challenging by having them work individually, having several survey questions that they have to put all together, more of a data synthesis. We might introduce line graphs into that as well, change over time. And if we do want to incorporate technology, hopefully you've seen from this session, there are many ways to incorporate technology into this. It does not require technology. When I did this the first time, all we had is pen and paper. We didn't use any type of technology whatsoever. But if you wanted to, you could use apps to collect the data. You could do a poll on WhatsApp. You can use Excel and other types of technology to create the graphs, or Mentimeter as we used it. Thanks, Rukia. I think so too. I think it's very ideal for content-based instruction because we see graphs in so much content. Oh, how would you grade the student survey? That's a great question, Lauren. So I would probably grade the graph itself. So I would want to see the data, and if the data match the graphs, as some of you mentioned that they might have unrealistic answers. So we would want to check that. If that wasn't a concern, then perhaps I would be grading the language production. If they were presenting the graph, I could grade their language for that, or if they're writing a description of the graph, that would be a way to grade it. Or if I had them make quizzes about their graphs, they could grade their quizzes. Yes, I think, Nancy, that this would also be great for project-based learning, right? You could turn this into a longer project, absolutely. So these are two resources I find useful related to this topic. Mentimeter was what we were using. Yes, I think this could use a rubric. So you might have the survey question maybe is one aspect of the rubric. Representing the data on a graph is maybe another part of the rubric. And then describing the information might be another part of the rubric, depending on what your focus was in the class that you used it for. Absolutely. Also, if you're looking for more just graph practice, this BBC Teach website is excellent. It has videos that describe how to use graphs and has many worksheets. Although they were the ones that I was using with my students and not having any luck with. But after we did this, we went back to that and they were doing better at it. So it's definitely is a nice resource. A bunch of references here. And then at this point, if you have any questions, we can take questions. And I also want to point out, when I see you again in 2 weeks, it will be our last session. So the first thing that comes to mind, Lauren, so Lauren's question is, what writing products are suitable for surveys and graphs? Two things come to mind. The first is just because of what I was doing, an IELTS style descriptive essay or descriptive paragraph that describes the topic of the graph and then identifies any significant trends. That would be one. It's also, I mentioned higher level classes. If they were doing some sort of research, this might be something that they include in it as well. Where actually I taught a research class in the US and we were having a problem with plagiarism. Students were just plagiarizing their information. And so we required a personal, some primary research. So they had to go around and somehow create a research question for their topic and do a survey. And they had to include that information into their research class, into their research essays. So that would be another example. I think also creating the quiz would be a suitable writing project because that would reflect their understanding of it as well. Good question, Lorian. Go ahead, Khadijah.
Thank you, Mina, for the opportunity. I just want to thank you so much for this session. I feel enlightened. As I said earlier, I told you I used to skip graphs, especially if I see them in English, because we always connect graphs with mathematics. But you've made it very clear. It is really relevant, especially in today's world. We are living in a digital world. And then I also think the graph charts will enable the learners to be critical thinkers and analysts. And this is very important for the 21st century. They need these skills to enable them to fit so well in this world. They are also digital citizens, and it will also help them to analyze data from various places. So I think it is a very important topic. I wish we could have more sessions on this so that we have a greater impact.
Thanks, Khadijah, very much. I appreciate that. And I think what you're saying about why it's important for our learners, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. All right, then. It is 6:32. Thank you, Rukia. I'm glad you agree. I hope you all have a great week. And I have an idea for our last session. But if you have an idea for a last session, do contact me and let me know. Because I would like it to be as interesting and relevant as possible.